If you ever see a starving stranger and a 10 billion credit bounty at the same time, don't check your scanner first. The warning pulsed across Ethan Cole's cracked visor as a faint system alert tried to stabilize itself in the cold, but the wind drowned it out. A low metallic howl slicing through the abandoned trade outpost like broken glass dragged across steel. The temperature read -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and every exposed surface creaked under the strain. Even his gloves stiffening as he tightened his grip around the last piece of bread in his pack. Barely 6 ounces, dry, dense, survival ration. Grade, the kind that kept you alive but never let you forget you were close to not being. His stomach had been empty for nearly 2 days, and the numbers on his HUD confirmed what his body already knew. Calorie deficit critical, hydration borderline, core temperature dropping 1 decimal at a time, slow and quiet like a countdown nobody else could hear. Then the sky flickered, not lightning, something cleaner, artificial, a broadcast beam slicing through the storm, and suddenly the air filled with a projected signal, crisp and impossible to ignore. Missing Empress, reward 10 billion credits. The image glitching but clear enough, a regal figure, tall, poised, luminous blue skin, eyes sharp with command, a presence that didn't belong in a place like this. Ethan blinked, instinctively reaching for his scanner, thumb hovering over the activation pad, because 10 billion credits didn't just change your life. It erased it and wrote a new one, somewhere warm, somewhere safe, somewhere you never had to count calories again. And then he saw her, not in the projection, but 20, maybe 30 feet ahead, half hidden behind a collapsed cargo crate, a figure hunched low against the wind, wrapped in torn fabric that barely moved. As if even the storm had stopped caring, she was digging through a pile of frozen waste, slow, uncoordinated, each movement delayed like her body had forgotten the timing of survival. And when she turned just slightly, the storm caught her face for a second. Blue skin dulled by exhaustion, lips cracked, eyes unfocused, not searching, just enduring. Ethan's visor flickered again, trying to align facial recognition, a soft chime suggesting a 12% probability match to the Empress profile. 12%, barely above noise, barely worth the risk, but enough to make his thumb press harder against the scanner pad. The wind shifted, carrying a thin, almost imperceptible sound, not a call for help, not even a word, just breath, uneven, fragile, real. Ethan exhaled slowly, the condensation freezing along the edge of his visor, and lowered his hand, the scanner never activating, because numbers were loud, but something else was louder. He stepped forward, boots crunching against ice-coated metal, each step deliberate, measured, like crossing a line he wouldn't be able to see once it was behind him. The woman didn't look up at first, didn't react, until his shadow broke through the pale light, and then her eyes lifted, wary, distant, ready for rejection before it even happened. Ethan didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't explain. He just reached into his pack, pulled out the bread, felt its weight one last time, and snapped it clean in half, the sound sharp in the frozen air, before holding it out to her, palm open, steady, like it was the simplest thing in the world. For a moment, nothing moved. The storm paused between gusts, the projection above flickering through the same image again and again. Empress, reward, power, distance. Then her hand, trembling, reached forward, slow, uncertain, as if expecting it to disappear before she touched it. And when her fingers finally closed around the bread, her entire posture shifted, just slightly, like something inside her had remembered what it meant to be seen. The bread disappeared more slowly than Ethan expected, not devoured, not rushed, but broken into careful, deliberate bites, as if the act itself carried meaning beyond survival. She held each piece for a second before eating it, fingers trembling less with each motion, her breathing beginning to steady, though the wind still cut through the broken structures around them with a sharp, metallic whistle that echoed across the empty outpost. Ethan shifted his weight, glancing once at the flickering projection above, the same image looping again, the same title, the same impossible number, 10 billion credits, enough to rebuild a fleet, enough to never stand in a place like this again. And yet the woman in front of him looked nothing like the figure in the broadcast, no crown, no armor, no presence of power, only exhaustion and something quieter, something harder to name. His visor pulsed softly as the system attempted another passive scan, recalibrating based on proximity, but he turned his head slightly, breaking the alignment before it could complete. A small movement, almost accidental, but deliberate enough that the system registered it as user override. She noticed that, her eyes flicking briefly toward his visor, then back to his face, studying him now with a sharper focus, less fear, more curiosity. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, strained from disuse, each word measured like it had to be chosen carefully. "You did not verify me," she said, the translator in his suit catching the structure, smoothing it into standard English, though something in the cadence remained foreign, precise, controlled even in weakness. Ethan shrugged slightly, the motion stiff in the cold. "Did not need to," he replied, his voice quieter than usual, not from hesitation, but from the stillness that had settled between them. Her gaze lingered, searching his face as if expecting another answer, a hidden motive, a request, but none came. The storm shifted again, a stronger gust sending loose fragments of metal rattling across the ground. And for a moment she flinched, not from fear, but from instinct, her posture adjusting, shoulders straightening just a fraction too much for someone in her condition, a reflex of someone trained to stand differently, to be seen differently. Ethan noticed that, not consciously, but enough that it registered as something out of place, like a detail his mind filed away without comment. She finished the last piece of bread and lowered her hand slowly, looking at the empty palm as if it should still hold something, then back at him. And for the first time, there was something else in her expression, not suspicion, not distance, but a quiet confusion. "Among my people," she said, her voice steadier now. "Food is given with expectation, with record, with return." She paused, as if the concept itself needed translation. "You gave with none." Ethan let out a small breath that fogged against his visor, then faded. "Yeah," he said simply. "That happens." The silence that followed was different now, not empty, but shared, the kind that did not need to be filled. Above them, the projection flickered once more, then stabilized, the image sharpening for a fraction of a second, long enough that the features aligned more clearly, the eyes, the structure, the presence. And this time Ethan did not look away fast enough to avoid the comparison. But he did not react either, not outwardly, just a slight tightening in his jaw. A pause that lasted less than a second before he shifted his gaze back to her. She saw that too, of course she did. And something in her expression changed again, not fear, not pride, but recognition, not of being known, but of being understood without being exposed. The wind howled louder now, carrying a distant vibration beneath it, low and rhythmic. Something large moving through the upper atmosphere, not yet visible, but approaching, and both of them heard it. Both of them knew it meant something was coming, though neither spoke of it yet, standing there in the cold, between what was offered and what had not yet been revealed. The vibration grew stronger, no longer something imagined beneath the storm but a steady, controlled rhythm that did not belong to wind or broken machinery. And Ethan felt it through the soles of his boots first, then through the thin exoskeletal frame of his suit, a low hum that spoke of precision, of power held in restraint. His visor flickered again, this time not from internal error, but from external interference, the horizon lighting up in faint geometric lines as something above began to cut through the cloud cover with deliberate intent. He did not look up immediately. Instead, his eyes remained on her, watching the way she reacted. Because whatever was coming, she already understood it before he did. She had gone still, not frozen, but composed, her breathing even, her posture straightening in a way that no longer looked accidental. The exhaustion still there, but no longer in control, like a mask she had been wearing and was now choosing to set aside piece by piece. The wind shifted direction as the first shadow passed overhead, long and clean, not jagged like debris, but structured, purposeful, and the ambient light changed with it, dimming just enough to reveal the edges of something vast moving through the sky. Ethan finally tilted his head upward, just slightly, enough for his visor to register scale, and the numbers that appeared made no immediate sense: altitude, velocity, mass. all exceeding anything that should have been operating this close to a fractured trade route. The projection above them cut out entirely, replaced by a new signal that flooded every channel at once, a command frequency so clear it overrode even his internal systems. All units stand by. Do not engage. Await confirmation. The voice carried no strain, no urgency, just authority so absolute it did not need emphasis. Ethan's jaw tightened, not in fear, but in recognition of something larger than circumstance, something structured, organized, and very much not random. He looked back at her, and this time she did not look away, her eyes steady, focused, no longer searching for intention but measuring response. They are early, she said quietly, more to herself than to him, though the translator caught it all the same, her tone different now, not weak, not uncertain, but layered with something that did not belong to someone scavenging in the cold. Ethan let out a slow breath, watching the condensation freeze along the edge of his visor again. Friends of yours? He asked, the question simple, almost casual, but weighted with everything he had chosen not to confirm earlier. Her lips parted slightly, as if she might answer directly, but instead she glanced toward the sky, where the clouds were now parting in clean, circular patterns, not torn, but moved aside with intention, revealing the underside of a vessel so large it seemed to bend the horizon around it, its surface smooth, reflective, and marked with symbols that pulsed faintly. In synchronized light, smaller craft followed in perfect formation, descending in controlled arcs, their movements precise to the inch, no deviation, no hesitation. The ground around them responded, not with panic, but with silence, as if the entire outpost had recognized something it was not meant to challenge. Ethan's visor attempted another identification sweep, but the data returned was fragmented, restricted, classified at levels his system could not even label, and for the first time since the storm began, he felt something shift in his chest, not fear, but awareness, the kind that comes when a decision you thought was small begins to unfold into something irreversible. Beside him, she took a single step forward, not away from him, but toward the open space between them and the descending craft, and the movement was enough to change everything about how she occupied the world around her, no longer diminished, no longer hidden, but present in a way that drew the eye without effort. Ethan watched her, the memory of the projection aligning now with what stood in front of him, not perfectly, not in appearance, but in presence, in the way the space itself seemed to adjust around her. The wind dropped for a moment, a brief pocket of stillness, and in that silence, the first of the smaller ships settled onto the frozen ground with a controlled, almost gentle descent, its surface unfolding in precise segments, revealing a pathway that led directly toward them. Ethan did not move, did not reach for his tools, did not activate any defensive protocol. He simply stood there, the taste of dry bread still lingering faintly in the air between them, and realized that whatever came next had already been decided the moment he chose not to look at his scanner. The ramp extended with a soft, measured glide, not a mechanical drop, but a controlled invitation, its surface unfolding in clean segments that locked into place without a single wasted motion, each line illuminated by a faint blue glow that pulsed in steady intervals like a heartbeat. Ethan watched the figures emerge, not rushing, not scanning wildly, but walking in synchronized precision, their armor smooth and reflective, carrying no visible weapons, only presence, the kind that did not need to threaten to be understood. Their formation spread just enough to define space, a corridor of intent leading directly toward the woman beside him. She did not step back. She did not hesitate. Instead, she moved forward again, one step, then another, her pace calm, measured, as if she had walked this path 1,000 times before. Even though minutes ago she had been searching through frozen debris, the contrast did not feel like transformation, but revelation, as if the storm had only been hiding what had always been there. Ethan remained where he was, his boots anchored against the ice, his visor flickering as it struggled to reconcile what it was seeing with what it had already recorded, probability markers collapsing into uncertainty, system prompts requesting confirmation he had already chosen not to give. The leading figure stopped 10 feet from her, then lowered their head in a motion so precise. It carried weight beyond habit, and the rest followed, a ripple of acknowledgement that moved through the formation in perfect sequence. No words were spoken at first, only the soft hum of their equipment and the distant resonance of the larger vessel above, holding position in the sky like a silent witness. She stood there, facing them, and for a brief moment Ethan saw both versions at once. The one who had taken bread from his hand, and the one now being recognized without question, and he understood that neither replaced the other. They were the same, only seen from different distances. When she finally spoke, her voice carried differently, not louder, not forced, but aligned, each word settling into the air with clarity that did not need translation. "Stand down," she said, and the effect was immediate, not because of the command itself, but because of who gave it. The formation shifted, not retreating, but easing, the tension that had not been visible now released in subtle adjustments, shoulders lowering, stances widening, as if the environment itself had recalibrated around her presence. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound quiet inside his helmet, and only then realized he had been holding his breath, not from fear, but from the weight of watching something that did not belong to ordinary moments. She turned slightly, just enough that her profile faced him again, and the difference in her expression was not in power, but in awareness, a recognition that he now saw what he had chosen not to confirm earlier. For a second, neither of them spoke, the distance between them unchanged, yet entirely different. Defined now by knowledge rather than uncertainty, Ethan shifted his stance, the ice cracking softly beneath his boot, and gave a small nod, not formal, not rehearsed, just acknowledgement, as if the situation still belonged to something simple, something grounded. Her gaze softened, not losing its clarity, but allowing something else through, something quieter, something that did not match the scale of the ships above or the figures around them. The wind began to rise again, not as harsh as before, but enough to carry the faint scent of cold metal and distant energy through the air, and in that moment, the entire outpost seemed to hold its breath between what had been revealed and what had not yet been said. The formation held its position, silent and unwavering, but the focus of every gaze had shifted, no longer scanning the environment, no longer measuring threat, only waiting. And it was clear they were not waiting for orders from above, but for something far simpler, far closer. Ethan felt it in the stillness, in the way the air seemed to settle around a single point, her. She stepped forward again, closing the distance between herself and the lead figure, and this time there was no trace of hesitation left in her movement, only intention. The blue glow from the ramp reflected faintly across her skin, restoring a subtle luminosity that the storm had nearly erased, and for the first time since he had seen her, she looked like the image that had filled the sky, not identical, but undeniable. The lead figure lowered even further, a gesture that carried weight beyond protocol, and when they finally spoke, their voice was filtered, measured, each word precise. "Your absence has destabilized 3 sectors. Command has been holding position for 6 hours awaiting confirmation of your status." The tone was respectful, but beneath it was something else, relief, controlled, contained, but present. She listened without interrupting, her expression calm, absorbing the information as if it were expected, as if the scale of it did not press on her the way it might on anyone else. Ethan shifted slightly, his visor dimming automatically as the brightness from the ship adjusted, and he found himself watching not the soldiers, not the ships, but her, the way she carried the moment, the way nothing about it seemed to overwhelm her. Even after everything he had just seen, she responded with a small motion of her hand, not dramatic, not commanding, just enough to signal acknowledgement. Maintain perimeter. No escalation. Civil structures are to remain untouched. Her voice remained steady, but now there was a layer beneath it, something that connected her to everything above them, something that made the air itself seem to listen. The lead figure inclined their head again, processing, accepting, then stepping back to relay the command without question. Ethan let out a slow breath, the condensation fading across his visor, and glanced once more at the surrounding structures, the broken walls, the scattered debris, the place that had felt abandoned only minutes ago now quietly preserved under orders that had not even been raised in volume. She turned back toward him fully this time, and the difference between them was clear, not in height or position, but in the world that now stood behind her, vast, structured, waiting, and yet she looked at him with the same eyes that had searched his face moments ago for something simple. For a second, neither spoke, and then she lowered her gaze slightly, not in submission, not in distance, but in reflection, as if choosing her next words with more care than before. "You understood what you were doing," she said quietly, the translator smoothing the phrasing but not the weight behind it. Ethan shook his head once, a small motion, almost amused despite everything around him. "No," he answered, his voice even, grounded. "I understood you were hungry." The simplicity of it lingered. In the space between them, sharper than any command that had just been given, and for the first time since the ships had arrived, something in her expression shifted in a way the others could not see, a fracture not of weakness, but of something deeper, something that did not align with power or control. She looked down at her empty hand again, the place where the bread had been, and her fingers closed slightly as if the memory of it still held shape. Above them, the massive vessel adjusted its position by a fraction, stabilizing, silent, waiting, but here on the ground, in the space between two individuals, the scale of everything seemed to narrow to something far more fragile and far more significant. The silence between them stretched, not empty but full, like the pause before something decides what it wants to become, and Ethan found himself aware of small things again. The faint hum of his suit regulator stabilizing his temperature, the soft crunch of ice shifting under his boots, the distant echo of engines holding position above like a restrained breath that refused to release. She did not move immediately, her gaze still lowered toward her hand, as if the absence of the bread carried more weight now than its presence had moments before, and when she finally looked up again, there was no trace of confusion left, only clarity, and something quieter beneath it, something that did not belong to command or protocol. "In my world," she said slowly, her voice softer now, less formal, as if choosing to step away from the structure surrounding her. "Giving is recorded, measured, returned with precision." The translator carried the words cleanly, but the meaning behind them felt heavier, older, shaped by systems Ethan could not see. He tilted his head slightly, listening, not interrupting, because whatever she was about to say did not sound like an order. It sounded like something else entirely. She took a small breath, the cold air visible for a moment before fading. "Nothing is given without expectation," she continued, her eyes meeting his again, steady, searching not for answers, but for understanding. "It is how we maintain balance, how we define worth." Ethan shifted his stance, the motion slow, grounded, his gloved hand brushing lightly against the side of his pack where the bread had been, now empty, and he let out a quiet breath that fogged briefly against his visor. "Sounds exhausting," he said, not dismissive, not mocking, just honest, the kind of honesty that did not try to reshape anything. Something in her expression changed at that, not dramatically, just a slight softening at the edges, like tension releasing in a place that had been held too long. Around them, the soldiers remained still, their presence constant but distant, as if this moment did not belong to them, as if they understood instinctively that whatever was happening here was outside their structure. The wind shifted again, carrying a low resonance from the ship above, and for a moment the light changed, casting long, faint reflections across the frozen ground that stretched past both of them, connecting their positions in a way that felt almost deliberate. She glanced briefly toward the formation, then back to him, and when she spoke again, her voice carried both layers now, the authority he had seen and the quiet he had just heard, balanced without conflict. "They will expect me to return immediately," she said, not as a command, but as a fact, something already set in motion. Ethan nodded once, the movement simple. "That makes sense," he replied, his tone even, as if the arrival of an entire fleet was just another piece of weather passing through. She studied him for a second longer, as if measuring that response, as if trying to find where it came from, and then her gaze dropped again, briefly, to her hand, her fingers closing once more as if holding on to something that was no longer there. "You chose not to confirm," she said quietly, the words carrying more weight now, not an accusation, not even a question, just acknowledgement. Ethan shrugged again, the motion subtle. Would not have changed anything, he answered, and after a brief pause added, you still would have been hungry. The simplicity of it settled into the air between them, heavier than any command she had given, heavier than the presence of the ships above, because it did not depend on position or power, only on what had already happened. She looked at him then, really looked, not as a subject, not as a stranger, but as something she had not accounted for, something that did not fit into the system she had described, and for a brief moment, the structure around her seemed to fall away, leaving only the person who had stood in the storm and taken bread from his hand, above them. The vessel adjusted again, a subtle shift that sent a low vibration through the ground, a reminder that time was still moving, that expectations were waiting. But here, in the space between them, something had already changed, something that could not be measured, recorded, or returned. The air shifted again, not with wind this time, but with expectation, a subtle tightening that moved through the formation as if every system, every mind, every unseen protocol had reached the same conclusion at once, and Ethan felt it without needing a display to confirm it. The moment had reached its edge. One of the figures stepped forward from the line, movements precise but not aggressive, their posture carrying the weight of procedure rather than threat, and when they spoke, the tone was respectful, controlled, but layered with urgency held tightly in check. Your presence is required aboard immediately. Command cannot maintain delay beyond this window. The words hung in the air like a boundary being drawn. She did not respond right away. Instead, she turned her head slightly, not toward the speaker, but toward the horizon, as if measuring distance, not in miles or time, but in something less defined, something internal. Ethan watched her, the faint hum of his suit steady in his ears, the cold no longer biting as sharply as before, as if his body had adjusted to it, or simply stopped noticing. He shifted his weight once, boots grinding softly against the ice, and glanced at the open ramp, the path lit in that steady blue glow, waiting, patient, inevitable. Looks like your ride is getting impatient, he said, his voice even, almost casual, but there was something underneath it now, not concern, not regret, just acknowledgement that this moment was ending whether either of them wanted it to or not. She turned back to him slowly, and this time there was no distance in her gaze, no barrier of status or uncertainty, only clarity, and something else, something he had not seen in her before, something that did not belong to command or survival. She took a step closer to him, closing the space that had remained between them since the ships arrived, and for a moment the world beyond them seemed to dim, not literally, but in focus, as if everything else had become secondary. If you had confirmed, she said quietly, her voice steady but softer now, you would have been compensated beyond measure. The statement was not an offer, not a test, just a fact placed between them. Ethan let out a small breath, watching it fade in the cold air, and shook his head once. I already got what I needed, he replied, the simplicity of it carrying more weight than the numbers that had filled the sky earlier. She studied him for a second longer, as if trying to reconcile that answer with everything she knew, everything she had been taught, and then something in her expression shifted again, not breaking, but opening, a small fracture in a system that had always held firm. Behind her, the figure who had spoken remained still, waiting, not interrupting, but the urgency in their stance had not lessened. The vibration from above deepened slightly, a reminder that the window was closing. She turned partially toward the ramp, then stopped, her movement incomplete, caught between motion and stillness. And in that pause there was something heavier than any command she had given. Ethan did not move, did not step back, did not step forward. He simply stood there, grounded, present, the same way he had been when he first offered the bread, as if nothing about this moment required him to change. She looked at him one last time, and this time the weight of it was different, not questioning, not measuring, but remembering, as if she understood that this moment would not be recorded in any system she knew, would not be quantified or returned, but would remain anyway. The wind picked up again, brushing past them with a softer edge, carrying the faint hum of engines and something quieter beneath it, something that felt like the end of a question and the beginning of something neither of them had planned. She drew a slow breath, steady, controlled, and then began to turn toward the ramp, the path of light waiting, the world behind her calling her back. But something in the way she moved suggested that what she was leaving behind would not remain unchanged. She took 3 steps toward the ramp before stopping again, the blue light stretching across the ice beneath her feet, reflecting upward in soft lines that traced the edges of her form. And for a moment it looked as if the world itself was trying to guide her forward. The figures at the base of the ramp did not move, but something in their stillness sharpened, not impatience, but readiness, like a held breath waiting for release. Ethan remained where he was, watching without expectation, his hands relaxed at his sides, the empty pack resting against his back lighter now in a way that had nothing to do with weight. She turned again, not fully this time, just enough that her voice could reach him without distance, and when she spoke, it was not to command, not to declare, but to understand something that still did not fit within her world. Where I come from, every act creates a ledger, she said quietly, the words steady but softer than before. Every kindness demands balance, every gift defines obligation. The wind moved between them, carrying her voice cleanly through the cold air, and Ethan tilted his head slightly, listening the same way he had from the beginning, without trying to reshape what he heard. Then maybe your system is broken, he replied, not with challenge, not with defiance, just with the same grounded simplicity that had guided every choice he had made so far. The words settled in the space between them, and for a brief moment, nothing else existed. Not the ships, not the soldiers, not the waiting command above, only that quiet contradiction. She stood there, the light from the ramp behind her, the storm around them easing into a low, distant hum, and something in her expression shifted again, deeper this time, not a crack, but a realization, as if she had reached a boundary she had never questioned before and found nothing on the other side to hold it in place. Her gaze dropped once more to her hand, the one that had held the bread, and her fingers closed slowly, not to grasp, but to remember, as if the absence itself had become something tangible. Behind her, the lead figure took a measured step forward, careful, controlled, their voice calm but carrying a finality that could not be delayed any longer. We must depart now, they said. And the weight of it was not pressure, but inevitability. She did not look back at them immediately. Instead, she took a slow breath, steady, and then stepped back from the ramp. Just one step, but enough to shift the balance of the moment entirely. The formation did not react outwardly, but the change was felt, subtle and immediate, as if a pattern had been altered in a way they could not yet process. Ethan watched her, the faint reflection of the ship's light catching in his visor, and for the first time since everything had begun, he felt uncertainty, not about what she was, but about what she would choose. She turned fully toward him now, the authority still there, the presence still undeniable, but layered with something that did not belong to command structures or recorded systems, something quieter, something human in a way that had nothing to do with species. You said it would not change anything, she said, her voice low, steady, carrying both truth and question, that I would still be hungry. Ethan nodded once, the motion small, grounded. Yeah, he answered simply. She held his gaze for a moment longer, and then something in her posture shifted, not upward, not stronger, but freer, as if a weight had been removed that no one else could see. Above them, the massive vessel adjusted again, a deeper resonance rolling through the air, the final call echoing without words, and still she did not move toward it. Instead, she took another step away from the ramp, back into the space where she had stood before, where the storm had touched her, where the bread had been given, and in that choice, quiet and absolute, something far larger than any fleet began to change. The shift did not echo through the sky with noise or command. It settled instead into something quieter, something far more difficult to measure. And for a moment, even the massive vessel above seemed to pause, not in motion, but in purpose, as if recalculating a path that had never accounted for this possibility. The formation at the base of the ramp held steady, but the stillness had changed, no longer anchored in certainty, now edged with something unfamiliar, something like hesitation. She stood there between two worlds, one defined by structure and expectation, the other by a single moment that had not asked for anything in return, and Ethan could see it in the way her shoulders carried both at once, not in conflict, but in contrast. The wind softened, brushing past them in low, steady currents that carried the faint hum of engines, and something else, something almost like silence learning how to exist again. She looked down at her hand one last time, then slowly opened her fingers, not to release anything, but to acknowledge what had already been given and could never be taken back. When she spoke, her voice did not rise to meet the scale of the fleet above. It remained grounded, calm, but carried farther than before. "All units," she said, and the communication channels caught it instantly, relaying her words through every system in range. "Withdraw to high orbit. Maintain observation. No engagement. No enforcement." The command did not rush, did not press. It simply existed, and that was enough. The lead figure hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, not in defiance, but in the presence of something unexpected, then lowered their head again, deeper this time. "As you command," they replied, and the formation shifted, not abruptly, but with controlled precision, stepping back, clearing the path, not for her to return, but for the space she had chosen to remain in. Above them, the vessel responded, its position adjusting, rising slowly, the immense structure pulling away from the broken outpost, the light dimming as distance grew, until the sky reclaimed its natural darkness, the storm reclaiming its quiet rhythm. Ethan watched it happen without speaking, the scale of it unfolding in silence. And then he looked back at her, the same way he had from the beginning, not as something distant, not as something elevated, just as the person standing in front of him. She met his gaze, and this time there was nothing left between them to interpret, no hidden identity, no unspoken question, only understanding, and something deeper, something that had not existed before this moment. She took a slow step closer, closing the final distance, and for a second the world seemed to narrow again, not because of what stood above them, but because of what had just changed below. "In all my life," she said quietly, her voice carrying no title now, no weight of position, only truth, "I have been given everything that could be measured, counted, returned." She paused, her eyes steady, unguarded, but never this. Ethan did not answer right away. He simply stood there, the cold no longer biting, the storm no longer pressing, because whatever mattered had already been done. After a moment, he gave a small nod, the same simple gesture he had offered before, unchanged by everything that had followed, and said, "It was just bread." She looked at him for a long second, and then something in her expression finally broke, not into weakness, not into loss, but into something raw and unguarded, something that did not belong to empires or systems, something that belonged only to being seen without expectation, and her eyes filled, not with sorrow, but with something far more difficult to contain. She did not hide it, did not turn away. She simply let it exist, standing there in the cold, in the quiet, holding on to a moment that could never be recorded, never be balanced, never be returned. And as the last trace of the fleet disappeared into the dark sky above, the storm settled fully around them again, and for the first time, it did not feel empty. It felt like something had stayed.